So in our last video, we talked about pitch, how high or how low the pitch is on the staff. But we didn't discuss how long or how short, which is duration, and that's what this video is all about. Now, each note and rest actually has a name that tells you not actually how many beats it's worth, but how the notes and rests relate to each other. So it's actually all about ratios and fractions. And before my math phobes check out on me and just give up, hear me out because I think this visual could be helpful. So the names of those notes don't actually tell you the number of beats. I hear a lot of kids go, like a half note should be a half beat. Why is an eighth note a half beat? Or why is an eighth note a half beat? Well, this is why. So think in terms of pizza, like I had for dinner. I love pizza. Okay, think in terms of pizza. You've got your whole pizza here, or pie, whatever floats your boat. No matter how big this is, it could be personal sized, it could be family sized, which for me is personal size, or it could be, one of those tiny little microwave ones. No matter what size it is, if you cut it in half, there's half a pizza left. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind. And if you cut it in quarters, you have a quarter on each slice, right? And eighths and sixteenths. You see where I'm going with this, right? So the same, no matter how big this is always half of it, right? So the same works with the names of the rests and the notes. So we're going to start actually filling it in up here. So we do have things called whole notes and whole rests. You might have heard of them. Because I'm going to put both of them in here. Whole notes look something like that. Okay, and our whole rests look something like this. There we go. Okay, either one. Now, however long that whole note is, let's say it's worth 4. That's a really common value for a whole note. If this is 4 beats of sound, this is 4 beats of silence. That's what rests are. They're just measured silence, whereas notes are measured lengths of sound. Okay, so we've got whole note, we have whole rest. Now we have half notes and half rests. I'm just gonna put one in each. Your half note looks like this. You've got a little note head and a stem. Your half rest looks very familiar. Looks very much like your whole rest, except flipped around. And I had a little trick when I was a kid that worked for me. If it works for you, great. If not, do something else. But to be able to tell them apart, my piano teacher used to draw this little guy up here. There he is. Smile. Doop. And if he's walking around, he will fall in the whole rest. Okay, and then half and hat are similar sounding. I know it's a stretch, but it worked for me. So if you draw a little face down here, your half rest looks an awful lot like a hat. That's how I tell them apart. If you have your own system, great. Okay, so just to kind of, as we're getting going here, if this whole note is worth 4 beats, this is going to be worth, cut it in half, 2, right? And this, it doesn't matter how many beats this is always going to be half of it. If this is 8, this is 4. If this is 100, this is 50. You got me? Okay, so it's about ratio and about relationship to each other, not necessarily this note is this many beats, because that changes. Okay, now we have quarters. And quarter notes have a filled in note head. They look like a half note, but the note head is filled in with a stem. I'm going to throw 2 of them on there. I'm going to alternate them around their little table here. There we go. And I'm going to put the quarter rest over here. It looks like a lightning bolt with a little C on the bottom. Little Harry Potter scar there. Okay, so those are your quarter notes and quarter rest. And then we have eighth notes and eighth rests. I'm not going to fill in the whole pie. You get the idea. Your eighth rest looks like a quarter note. So you start with that quarter note, has a note head and a stem, but now you're going to add a little flag to it. Boop. Okay, so that's your eighth note. Your eighth rest, oddly enough, looks like a 7 with a little knobbly thing on it. I'm sure that's the technical term for it, knobbly thing. And your 16ths, I'm definitely not going to write those in there. I'm going to actually write it on the outside so that you can kind of see them a little better. You start with your eighth note, note head, stem, flag, but to turn it from an eighth note into a 16th note, you have to add a second flag. Boom. Same thing with your 16th rest. It starts out like an eighth rest, but you add a second little knobbly thing. Okay, so those are your notes and rests that you're going to want to get familiar with and how they relate to each other. So stick with me to the very end, it'll make more and more sense. Now before we go on, I do want to do one thing in this lovely little corner over here, and that is that when you see eighth notes and 16th notes, if you ever have more than one in a row, they're often beamed together. So, and you're gonna see this on the next visual, but lots of these or lots of these in a row with little flags on them can be really hard to make sense of on the fly. As you're reading it off the staff, it can be confusing. Like, is that 6 or is that 7 16th notes in a row? I can't really tell. So the beaming helps with that. And usually they're grouped in beats. So oftentimes you'll see 4 16th notes, at least when you're starting out, and 2 8th notes beamed together, because that's how many would fill out a beat. So this is what it would look like. Instead of 2 8th notes right next to each other like this, it's actually going to show up. You're still going to do both note heads, and there are the lovely stems, but it's almost like these little flags are going to curl around and connect to each other, and you beam across the top. So that's your 8th note that you're probably more familiar with, to be honest. Okay, and then if you had 4 16th notes in a row, instead of having these little flags, 4 of those in a row, we're still going to have the same note heads. You're still going to have the same stems. You're going to beam it across the top just like you would for the 8th notes, but guess what? These are still 8th notes. Those are not 16th notes. If you were on a test supposed to write 4 16th notes, that would be what we call wrong. You've got to have a second beam across the top to match the 2 flags from the original single 16th note. Okay, so 16th notes, 8th notes, that's how you beam them together. Now you will probably see some 8th notes beamed in groups of 3 when you're in 6/8 time, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So some people prefer this type of visual because it actually kind of shows length for how long a sound is supposed to last. This one has just notes on it. It doesn't have the rests along, although I suppose I could write them in along the side as we go. Why not? I think I have a blue. Yeah, there's a different color that'll stand out. So we have our whole note, which however many beats this is, and it changes as we've established, your half notes are going to last half as long. There's your half note where it ends, and then a second one picks up here. Okay, so we have our, oh, this is a thick marker. We have our whole notes or rests would last this long. Our half notes or rests, our quarters, quarter notes or quarter rests, and 8th notes or 8th rests. Now you can kind of see why beaming helps it make more sense, right? Especially with 16th notes. You're like, wait a second, is that 12 or 13 or 6? I can't tell. You have to sit there and count them. So grouping them helps your brain make sense of them. Okay, and then we've got our 16th rests here. There it is. Okay, so some people prefer this sort of setup. I do have a link in the slides to the tree format, where it's kind of like this, but instead of the left to right sort of feel, it starts with the whole note at the top and then kind of makes a tree out like this to the shorter notes. And so if you prefer that one, you can totally use the link in the slide. I can't remember, I think it's 1 Minute Theory that put it out. But you can print those out, and those are useful as well. Always nice to have around. Okay, now for time signatures. So you know those 2 numbers on the staff at the very beginning of a piece of music, there's always 2 numbers stacked on top and on bottom. So sometimes it's like a 4 and a 4, sometimes it's a 6 and an 8. I'm just gonna put one up here. So let's do 6 8. It's a good time signature. Pretend you see those 2 numbers at the beginning of your staff. This is going to tell you 2 things. The top number, no matter what the time signature, the top number always tells you the number of beats per measure. You remember what a measure is, right? I mean, it's little sections of music. I've got a choral music here. What do we got? We got Did My Lord Deliver Daniel. Everybody's sung that song, right? At some point or another. Then you've got your, let's see if you can see this on the screen. There we go. So you've got your measures. You've got little vertical lines that break everything up into sections. There are your measures, and each of those you're going to get a certain number of beats. And this one, the top number is a 4, so you've got 4 beats per measure. See it? See it? There it is. And ours over here, we've got 6 beats per measure, okay? Now the bottom note is more about what we're talking about right now. Or bottom number, sorry, not bottom note. The bottom number tells you what kind of note is 1 beat. Okay, because remember that the number of beats each note or rest is worth can change. So this tells you what has just 1 beat. So that tells you where to start, right? So in this case, this number 8, if you put that in a fraction, what's another way of saying that? An eighth, right? So your 8th note is the thing that's equal to 1 beat, and you get 6 of them in each measure. That's what that time signature says. If you've got a 4 on the bottom, then you have, pretend the 4 is on the bottom over here, 1/4. 1/4 is another way of saying 1/4, right? So if there's a 4 on the bottom, then the quarter note is equal to 1 beat, and that's pretty common when people are first learning. Okay, so now I've switched the camera over to my desk so you can see a little cheat sheet I put together. Now, I'm a big fan of cheat sheets. I'm a big fan of condensing information that you need to know and having easy access to it whenever you want. This particular cheat sheet I've made available on the link right below this video. It's a Google Doc link, so you can print this out at home if you want. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you could use a notebook paper, whatever makes sense to you. You'll probably just want to have 3 columns and 8 rows as you move down. And I will try to kind of slide this up as we go. I know the writing might be a little bit small. But this is going to be a condensed cheat sheet of all the rhythmic values that you might need for this course. Now, I mentioned earlier that we weren't really doing dotted rhythms right now, which is true, but I put them on this cheat sheet because why make a second one later? So for now, just copy down the dotted information, the dotted half notes, the dotted quarter notes and eighth notes, and how many beats they're worth, etc. Just go ahead and copy it down, and we can always make more sense of it later. Okay, so we have here in this small writing down here, whole note and whole rest. Go ahead and draw your whole note and your whole rest. There it is. Okay, now in this column, I wrote beats in 4/4, 3/4, and 2/4. Those are really common time signatures that you're gonna run into in your choir music, and they all have 4s on the bottom, which means that a quarter note is going to have 1 beat. Okay, just take my word for that. And so that means your whole note, if a quarter of your pizza is 1 beat, think through it, how much would the full pizza be worth? Why, yes, you're right, it would be 4 beats. Okay, now we're just gonna work our way down this column first. We'll go to this one next because there's a really easy way to do that. Okay, so the next one down, this is the one that you didn't do. This is your dotted half note. You're gonna put a dot on the right-hand side. Be careful to make sure it's on the right-hand side and not on the bottom, because that would mean something different. That would be staccato. We can get to that at another time. Okay, and then we've got our dotted half rest, and really, I know it looks a little funky, but it's just your regular old half rest with a dot on that side. Now, on the subject of these rests here, your half and your whole rest, they look like holes in hats when they're by themselves like this, but when they're on a staff, they really just look like a tiny box that's either above or below the middle line. The ones that are below the middle line are your whole rests, above the middle line are your half rests. So anyway, your dotted half, just take my word for it, is gonna be 3 beats. Onto your half note. Make sure, yeah, you can still see it. Okay. Onto your half note, you've got your regular half note. Half of your whole note would be 2 beats, right? Oh, and your half rest. Sorry, I forgot the half rest. There we go. You got your half rest, your half note, 2 beats long. I believe I gotta slide this sucker up. There we go. Now here's another one you didn't do. We've got our dotted quarter and your dotted quarter rest. There it is. And just take my word for it that it will be 1.5 beats. We'll get to the partial beats a little bit later. Okay, and then we've got our quarter note, quarter rest. We did those before, plain old 1 beat. And feel free to pause anytime I'm going too fast. Again, total benefit of doing this as a video. And we have our dotted eighth note. I'm just going to do a single eighth note, a little flag. There they are. This one is going to be 3/4 of a beat, 3/4 of a beat, 3/4. And I find that a lot of times once this part gets into fractions, some people get the names mixed up. Don't forget that the names themselves, even though they are fractions, are all about how they relate to each other in this column, not about what's actually in the second column. Okay, and we have our regular eighth note, eighth rest. It's half a beat. And we have our 16th note and 16th rest, and that's just 1/4 of a beat. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't see that. There it is. So you can see as you work your way down the column, the notes get shorter and shorter. The notes and rests get shorter and shorter. Now, here's where it's fun to fill out what happens when the bottom number of your time signature changes from a 4 to an 8. That means your quarter note was 1 beat. Now what's 1 beat? It's actually an 8th note. So if you go down to your 8th note, here it is. This now is not going to be a half beat. It's going to be 1. So here's an easy way to figure out how much each of these things are worth in 6/8 time. What'd you have to do to move from this column to this column? You doubled it, right? So that's going to be what you do all the way down the column. So what's twice of a 4th? Okay, for you math people, think of a quarter of a pizza and another quarter of a pizza. You get half. Really, truly, the pizza thing works for me. Okay. Twice 3/4 is 6/4 or 1.5. Twice 1, twice 1.5, twice 2, twice 3, and twice 4. Now I'm going to put this in here, but beware that this one can actually be a little bit tricky because you can't forget the top number of your time signature. This actually only works in 9/8 time. If you're in 3/8 time or 6/8 time, the maximum number of beats you can fit in a measure is 3 or 6. You never get 8. But if you're in 9/8 time, you could possibly fit a whole note in there. It's not super common, especially towards the beginning, but it does happen occasionally. So now you have a full rhythmic value cheat sheet. And if you want to look at the links on the next couple of pages, there's a real useful way to kind of get these memorized so that you recognize these symbols in this column and you know what they're called and how they relate to each other, even if these two columns change. Those flashcards can be really, really useful. So get those memorized. It's really just, like I said before, kind of learning your alphabet, learning to read, sounding out words. It's the basic building blocks. So get those things down and then we move on to our next topic.